your light shine down.
What's going on, man? Charlie the Box. Check it out. Look at what I'm going to have in my box today is going to be how God played a role in founding the United States of America, or how he had he guided our founding fathers in coming up with the constitutional republic. See, back in the days, the forms of government that we always had in the world were an oligarchy, where a king and queen owned the land. They freaking did. They made all the rules up, and everything was theirs. Or you had a communist society where a group of people controlled every industry and every aspect of your freaking life. Or a dictator, when one man governed the land and everything was owned by him. So when our founding fathers tried to come up with a new form of government as the United States of America, they were clergymen, they were priests, and they had God in their lives. So when they had God in their lives, even though they all practiced different forms of religion, because some of them were Protestant, Catholic, Christian, and different other forms of Christianity, so they put all those differences aside, and they started contemplating to understand what they were going to do with forming a new country as the United States of America, as the 13 colonies were going to combine and form a new country, as give the power to the people, and how we bind government on a set of rules, how they can't take away the liberties of the people, as the freedom of speech, the freedom to practice religion, the freedom to bear arms and to form a militia, and all those different rights that we as Americans think that we're accustomed to nowadays, and are being diminished right in front of our eyes because we choose to lack to understand the severity of the problems that our federal government is doing to us. So back in the days when they came up with the republic, they said, okay, look, let's come up with a form of rules that binded the government or what they can't do to the people. And let's let the Bible govern the people, because we had God in our lives. Even though we were set up in different kind of form of Christianity, God was in all our lives. Because see, when our country was founded, in our schools, the beginning of the day, you said your prayers and you practiced a little bit of religion. Whatever one was yours, and hey, that was your community, that was your thing, go for it. Then after recess, then they taught you a little bit about your Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and why they came up with that concept, and how the federal government was supposed to have the limited amount of power, why they gave you the freedom of speech, why they gave you those different liberties and rights that were inside this, and how it bounded the federal government and the government in the United States of America. Then after lunch or whatever, then they started teaching mathematics, reading, spelling, and all this comprehension, and all those type of things, and verbs and stuff like that. So why nowadays have they took God out of the picture and they don't teach you this anymore? It's because even back when they founded the country, and in the middle and now, there's people that don't want you to have their liberties that you are accustomed to in the United States of America. That's why every law they pass now is to diminish your Constitution, like the Patriot Act, healthcare reform. It has nothing to do with giving you healthcare reform. It has nothing to do with securing the borders and getting terrorists by the Patriot Act. It's always to diminish this. The power to tax is the power to destroy. The power to regulate, if we can't do it under the constitutional law, we'll just make a regulation. And that's how they do it nowadays. And how they took God out of the equation now. How many people go to church nowadays? How many people know that this had a big role in founding the United States of America? And how they wanted this to govern the freaking government and this to govern the people. But see, that's how they're doing it. They manipulated the system to get us to where we're at today. I've asked people, because I got some people in my life that are really religious. I grew up Catholic and then we switched to Christianity. So I kind of know a little bit of both. Well, I know a lot of both. And I asked one of my loved ones, I said, well, okay, what did they mean in this, that it means a separation from church and state? And they said, well, that's the right of the people to practice whatever religion they want, and that's because of this and that. And I said, no, that's not what it is. That's a different form of that. What you're talking about is the First Amendment, to the freedom to practice whatever religion you want. Because in a Muslim country, if you don't practice, like in a dictator Muslim country, if you don't practice Muslim, the Muslim Quran or whatever they practice, their Bible, that you could be put to death if you practice Christianity inside like North Korea or Iran nowadays. That you don't have the freedom of religion. Okay, But what they meant by separation from church and state, they didn't want to combine because they didn't want the church to overlap the government, and this had no relevance. So we just have to make sure they don't combine to each other. You can practice whatever religion you want, but you'll also have to be educated to understand of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. So that's what they meant by separation for church and state. And then in your First Amendment, to practice whatever religion you want. See, why now is it that we're not being taught all these things to understand how much God did have a role in it? That's why on your currency it says "In God We Trust." That's why in most of your national monuments it shows respect to God and how much our founding fathers really knew that how much God had a role in all our lives. I'm sorry if some people don't believe in religion. Hey, that's to each its own. I really don't care what you do in your personal life. I don't care what you do in your house. As long as what you do in your house and what you do in your life don't affect the next man, that's why they gave you this. Because it's no concern to the next man what you do in your private life. Because you have the right to practice whatever religion you want. But see, dude, nowadays, I'm sorry calling you dude because I know some women are watching the videos too, but do you see how out of balance our country is? See, with your Constitution, Declaration of Independence, like I told you guys, there was just a right amount of balance the way they set up the system. How not just one man or one group of people are going to have the supreme amount of power governing all the people. That's why they came up with the three-party system with your judiciary, your executive, and your legislation. Because you don't want to give that much power to one group of people. Because even in our lives, in our country, and in your life, at your work, when you get a boss or you get a person, a coach or a mentor, or even a priest in some aspect, that much power over your life, people always end up getting corrupted, and they always do things that lean more to their favor. That's why they wanted to bind the amount of power any man could have in our country. And that's why they wanted us to practice religion and had God in our lives. Because we're not going to do those evil things that men get corrupted by the devil to do to the next man. But the system's all corrupted now. We've got it so far away from the Bible nowadays, and so far away from your Constitution, how they don't teach you either one of these anymore. And that's for a reason. Because even when they founded this country, they didn't want you to have these liberties. Certain people didn't want you to have the liberty to own a gun and the freedom of speech. Because the people shouldn't have those type of rights. So what makes you now think nowadays, by the actions of your federal government and these politicians, how they're taking you farther away from both of these and closer to a communist society where a group of power elite are governing the country, or a fascist society when corporations are ruling the country and telling your politicians what to do, or a socialist society by implementing a welfare system, a health care, and all these other socialist programs to get us to where we're at today. So you see how far irrelevant this is nowadays? You see how far they took the Bible and God out of your lives? Because it isn't one man that said, I don't want my kid to pledge allegiance and say, in God we trust, that stopped doing as much as God has been out of our lives. Taking the Ten Commandments out of national monuments or your city halls. It isn't one man that did that. One man doesn't have that much power. It's the legislation and your judicial and your executive branch that impose those tyrannies on the people. Because a prime example of that is healthcare reform in the United States of America. Healthcare reform had millions and millions of people all across the country that told them we don't want that form of government control of healthcare. And they called their freaking executives. They called their city halls, their senators and their president and told them, no, we don't want it. Millions of people. But they implemented it anyways. It was unconstitutional, but they passed it anyways. So why is your government doing what they do. Because they've infected socialism, communism, and fascism in your country. That's why they don't listen to you anymore. That's why they don't go by the Bible and they don't go by the Constitution. Every act that they pass, every bill that they pass, every tax that they pass draws you farther away from these liberties and God before your eyes. But if you always choose to ignore the big picture and see what they're actually doing, you're never going to see it because you're still looking at it like this, as a liberal and a liberal and a conservative, as a right and left, as a Republican and Democrats. And you're not stepping back and looking at the whole picture. And that's what I've done, America. I need to educate myself so I know what I'm talking about, so I can reach you guys to understand the severity of the problems that we face as Americans. So I advise you guys, get God back into your life. Find out what founded this country and how these had a big role in coming up with your constitutional republic. How God had a divine providence of giving man his freedom, because God would never want to impose tyranny on his people. All men are created equal in God's eyes. Judge a man by his character. Because of his actions, he's going to truly show you who he is. Look at the actions of our Democrats. Look at the actions of our Republicans. Do they do anything of really getting the people to understand what these both men and how they played a big role in founding this country? They don't do that nowadays. But see, most people, they look at me when I meet people in real life and they said, well, what makes you right, or what makes you think you know? Where did you get this education at? I said, well, the stuff that I know and the stuff that I learned, they're not teaching you in schools. Can't you realize that yet? Because most people would know the stuff that I'm saying. They're not teaching you about God anymore. They're not teaching you about your republic anymore. I am self-educated. And you know how you know I'm right? Because you know in your heart what I'm saying is true. And that's the way it's always going to be with me. So I advise you guys, educate yourself. Go to church. Find out what this really means and how we're losing it today. Because if you choose to do nothing about it, we're always going to continuously go down that socialist path, down that communist path, and get these fascist society in this country. And it's always going to be there. Because this is being diminished before your eyes. This has no relevancy in our lives if we the people don't uphold it. By their actions, your federal government showed you what they're doing to you. Putting up cameras, the Patriot Act, the healthcare reform, has nothing to do with freedom to the people. It's always to impose tyranny on the people. So the best way to fight back against this tyranny that our government's imposing on the people, it's through God and through education. So I advise you guys, like I tell you guys every time, if you're not going to do everything in your power to restore your life, liberty, and God in all our lives, you're going to do everything in your power to destroy it. Starting boss out.